Sicha we will be learning will be in the Sichas, Chelek, Yud Tes, Sicha Hey to Parshat Devarim. So the Rebbe says, the Misa from Bishulei Nochrim, concerning the prohibition of eating food cooked by a goy, that's called Bishulei Nochrim, or we call it nowadays Bishulei Akum, same thing. Was we learn from Posik, that we learn now, the Gemara learns this out, this din, from a Posik. Now, just to mention, if it's learned from a Posik, usually it's a din deraisa. We know that the Isser of Bishul Akum, of eating food cooked by a goy, is only Isser Rabbanan. So the Rebbe says here that even though the Gemara learns it out from a Posik, but it's B'derech HaSmachte. A lot of times when the Rabbanan made their own dinim, they were Seimer, they relied on a Posik, they connected it to a Posik, which means they found a remes, a hint in a Posik, and based on that, they made up their din. So Bishul Akum is a Isser the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan made the din, and the reason they made the din is because if you're going to eat from food cooked by a goy, it's possible that you'll socialize with the goy more and it'll come to intermarriage. It's one of the reasons. So it's the Isser only with the Rabbanan, but nevertheless, they connected to the Posik and Asmacht. And the Posik is a Posik in Parshat Devarim. The Posik says that when Moshe Rabbeinu tells that he sent messages to Sichei asking him to allow them to cross through his land to go to Eretz Canaan, they said to him, you will sell me food for money, and I will eat. And water you will give me for money, and I will drink. And the Gemara learns from here that since the Posek compares food that they're going to get from the goy, that's what they told Sicham, we'll get food from you, we'll buy food from you, compares it to water, just like water doesn't get changed through fire, which means water, there's no din that it's cooked by a goy because it doesn't become cooked. So to which food can you take from a goy? Only food that wasn't changed through fire, which means it wasn't cooked. But if it was cooked by a goy, you cannot eat it. So the Gemara connects this din to this posik. But in this din that you're not allowed to eat bishul akum, is no apluk that's vishul poskim. There's an argument amongst the codifiers, amongst the poskim. See the kelim was on belege when is ich pleitas bishul nochrim when eich oser oder nit, which means like this: when you cook treif of food in a kele, so the food is treif. Obviously, it's treif of food. The kele, the vessel in which you cooked it, is also treif. That means you're not allowed to use that kele by putting kosher of food in that kele that originally you used for treif of food, because when you cook something in a kele, in a vessel, the taste of the food that you cooked in it gets absorbed in the walls of the kele. Not the food itself, but it's called the plata. The taste that's given out from the food goes into the walls of the kele. If you're going to now use this kele, which absorbed the taste of non-kosher food, you're going to use it now for cooking kosher food. When you're cooking it, the taste from the walls of the kele will come out into the kosher food. So the kosher food now is going to have a taste in it of treifa food. So therefore, there's a din that any kele that was used for treifa food, you cannot use the kele. You cannot use the kele to cook kosher food because the plata from the treifa food that went into the walls of the kele is going to come out into the new kosher food that you're going to use. The question is, what is by bishul akum? If a goy cooks food in a kele, kosher food, but the food was cooked by a goy, now it's not allowed to be eaten. So that food that was cooked by the goy cannot be eaten. What about the kele? Can the kele be used? The kele absorbed the taste of the food cooked by a goy. So the question is, does it also become osir? So that's what the Rebbe says. There's a machloikis whether the plate of the taste that's given out by bishulei nochrim, by the cooking of the goy, the food that was cooked by a goy, does the kelim also then eichosir, they also become forbidden, or the need, or not? And the Rebbe explains the machloikis. Is eine do poskim is halten. There are some poskim that hold, and he brings now for the Rosh and others, that they hold as you bald the issue from bishul nochrim mishum chasna. Since the reason why you're not allowed to eat food cooked by a goy is because it might bring you to socialize and eventually bring you to intermarry with a goy. But das gebringt zu chite mit anoch is that to bring you to marry a goy. Hat man nicht geasset sehr pleite. So the taste of this bishul akum, of the food cooked by a goy, kosher food but cooked by a goy, the taste of it that went into the kele doesn't become osir. For him behol lekev adam mishum chasnes. Now there is no Isser of Chasnas. See, something that's Osir Be'etzem, treifa food, the taste is also Osir. So the taste now is in the walls of the kela. If you're going to cook kosher food, that treifa taste will go into the kosher food. But here, this food itself is not treif. It's only also because it might bring you, if you allow yourself, if you're to eat cooked food cooked by a goy, you'll go to his house and you'll eat and you'll get friendly, you'll socialize, and they'll bring you to chas v'shalom to get married to a goy. But that doesn't apply to the taste. The taste that goes into the walls is not something that is a reason that it'll bring you to socialize with the goy and intermarry. And therefore, even though the food that's cooked by a goy is osir with the rabbanon, but the kela in which the food was cooked is not osir, because the kela only has the taste, and the taste is not something that we're afraid will bring you to intermarry. But das reva poskim is, but the Beis Yosef says that most of the poskim hold as eich the kelim zayin osir, that even the vessels in which the goy cooked the food is osir. Why? The kol shechruch chachamim plitosik kameim, because anything that the chachamim forbid, the plate or the taste is as osir as the food itself. And since in the kela you have the taste that came from the food cooked by a goy, and that's osir, so the kela is also osir because that plate or that taste is osir. The Ashlema, the Rebbe says you could say, and you could explain it. The Rebbe explains it even more, this opinion of most of the poskim. There's a din like this. There's certainly requirements of schach. To put schach on the sukkah has to be something that grew from the ground, something that's detached from the ground, something that's not makabel to all kinds of restrictions, which things are kosher for schach. What about if you have a beam, a long beam? So it's wood, it grew from the ground, and now it's detached from the ground, and it's not makabel tumah, so you should be able to use it. And you're able to use it like sticks of wood, you're allowed to use. But what happens if you have a very wide stick? It's 4 tefachim wide. It could be 4 tefachim by 2. But in itself, it's 4 tefachim. So if you lay down that nesa, that means that beam on it, it should be mutter, because it's wood that came from the ground and it's cut off from the ground and not makabel tumah, so it should be mutter. Nevertheless, the Chachamim said it's osir for schach. The reason why it's osir, gzeira mishum tikra. Chachamim said if you're going to use such wide pieces of wood, then it'll look like mamash a tikra, like a ceiling. It'll look like a regular ceiling which passes to sukkah. So that's only if you put down the wood, that piece of wood, down, that laying on flat, it's 4 tefachim. And 4 tefachim is big, so it'll make it look like a tikra. But the din is, as afilu hofkan al tzideyim, and even if you take that same piece of wood and you turn it to the side, she'ein banarbo, let's say it's a 4 tefachim by 2 tefachim. So if you lay it down, so there's 4 tefachim laying on this schach, it looks like a tikra, looks like a beam. What happens if you turn it around? So that when you look up in the schach, it's only 2, and the 4 is in the height. So it's laying with 2. It's also it's also possible. You can't use those pieces of wood, even if you put it down in the way that it comes out, that it doesn't lay on the 4. Since this piece has a name of being posel, then it's a posel b'cholinian, they become posel completely, like Rashi says. So that piece is posel. But the Rakachover is masbin. The Rakachover explains, "Ados is va'elazach was is osem sadekzeire." The Rakachover explains like this, because something that is forbidden, because the Chachamim made a decree exzeire, sulibananda zach noch is oser, that this is bemis mutter, but the Rabbanim made it also because of something else. This might bring you to do something else, which is also, like in our case, a tikra. If you put it down, it'll bring you to also a tikra. It'll be like a roof. You'll put up a roof and think it's also kosher. So this thing that the Chachamim made osir because of something else becomes like the etzem isur, like the isur itself, like an object of Isur. Not only when the reason applies. This became Osir. Well, that is that beginning. The same thing that Rebbe says is in our case. Even though the reason why you're not allowed to eat food cooked by a goy is because it might bring you to intermarriage, and the taste of the food that's absorbed in the kela has no reason that it'll bring you to intermarriage. But that food becomes like the Isur itself, like an Isur on its own. The Mela bleibt der Isur, when es ist nicht der Tam, Mela, that Isur remains even if there is no reason. The reason doesn't apply. The reason of maybe it'll bring you to intermarry will not apply. Nevertheless, it became the Etzem Isur. So just like a piece of chazer when you cook in the kela, Tam of the chazer that goes into the kela is Osir. this food, even though be'etzem it's not, it's only also because the guy cooked it, because if you might bring it into marriage, but it became like the Isser itself, and therefore the taste of this bishalakim that goes into the kela is also Osir. That's the reason for most of the poskim. That's how we paskin, that a kela in which a guy cooked food, kosher food, but he cooked it, that kela is Osir, and the only way you could use the kela is if you kasher it like any kela, they became treif. So the Rebbe says now, the Yashleimer Amoket to the day of the Rebbe poskim, the Rebbe says I could bring a source to this opinion of most of the poskim for them Schapiro was wird gebracht in Sie Mesichta Avodah from the story that's told at the end of Mesichta Avodah. Actually, this siche is a siyum on Mesichta Avodah. The kasher zum din wie man darf kasher nasaken from Gül und Ochim Lechel Batzeinen. There the Gemara talks about how do you kasher a knife that became treif because it was used for bishul akum, which were used for treif for food, kosher food, but cooked by a guy. Lechel Batzeinen. If you want to use that same knife that was used for bishul akum, and you want to use it for something that's cold, not for something that's hot. So here there's a special din the Gemara says how to kasher it. And another 13, the Rebbe says, what's the din the Gemara says? That you take the knife and you stick it into hard sand, and you stick it in 10 times, and that takes out the taste of the gabe. Using it for cold, it takes out the taste. Not only, see, normally we always say that when you stick a knife into the hard ground, what happens is if there's any fats, a layer of fats on the side, it'll scrape it off. So that won't be there. We're not talking about scraping off the fats. We're talking about taking out the taste that's absorbed in the keli, in the knife. So it comes out from the Gemara that even for that, it'll work. That if you take the knife and you stick it in the knife, it was only trade because of bishalakum, and you stick it into the ground 10 times, it'll even take out the taste that was absorbed in the knife. So there's a story there, and the Rebbe will soon right away bring to what the story is. Now, in that story, it doesn't say why the knife was treif. The Gemara talks about how to kasher a knife not from bishalaka. I'm sorry, what I said before bishalaka, I didn't mean bishalaka. There it talks about, taking it back, it talks about a regular, how to kasher a knife that became treif. It was used with treif for food. But you want to use that treif for knife, but you don't want to use it for hot. If you want to use it for hot, you have to kasher the regular way. But if you want to use it for cold stuff, you still got to do something to it. And that's what the Gemara says. You got to stick the knife in 10 times into the ground. And then the Gemara tells a story in connection to a knife that was treif. And the whole story, as the Rebbe will explain the Sikha. Now, the Rebbe says here, as there's Isser for the Mimsak and the Givem B'Tzad Bishul Nochrim, if we're going to learn that the reason that the knife was treif was because of bishul lakum, not because of regular treif and treif for food. Then for entvet when kamet miyas in them sipros, and many questions we have on the story in the Gemara will be answered. In other words, the rule is like this: if you have anything in the Gemara, and there's no hechrech, nothing that forces you to say that it's talking about a certain situation, a certain way, but if you say that if we're going to explain that it's talking in a certain way, many kashas will be answered. But if we don't give that explanation, the kashas will remain. That's the proof that that's the way it is. Here we're saying that the Gemara is going to tell us a story about a knife that was treif and all those things around it. If we're going to learn that the knife was treif because of regular treif of food, then we have many kashas on the Gemara. But if you're going to learn that the knife was treif because of bishul akum, then a lot of the kashas will be answered, as the Rebbe will explain. Now, in that case, that's a raya that kelim of bishalakam are osir. Because according to those poskim hold that the kelim of bishalakam is not osir, you can't explain the Gemara there, as we'll see, that the treifa kelim was because of bishalakam, because they hold there's no such thing as a treifa kelim because of bishalakam. So they'll have to learn pshat in that Gemara that the kelim was treif, the knife was treif from regular treifa food. Then we have all the kashas. But if you're going to learn like they learn, that a keli that was used for bishalakim is also osir, the mele, you could learn that the case in the Gemara that we're going to explain now, the knife that was treif was bishalakim. And if you learn like that, you'll answer many kashas. So that's what the Rebbe says. So this is going to be a mocker, a source to the opinion that the kelim of bishalakim are osir, and that will answer many questions. That says, if you're going to learn that the Isser of this knife that we're going to talk about in the story was not the regular, we call it giuli nochrim, that you regular kashering a kelim from regular tray for food. it wasn't that case, but it was Bishalakum, the Farentret Van Kamet Mies and the Sipper, so many questions in the story will be answered. Now the Rebbe is going to bring the story in the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah and ask many questions, and then explain that if the Isser was Bishalakum, some of these questions the Rebbe asked will be answered. Is araya that there is such a thing as a kela that's also Misad Bishalakum. This is what the Gemara says. Mar Yehuda Bote Bar Tuve Havayos V'Kamat Shvur Malke. Mar Yehuda, or Rashi uses also Losh in another place to negate this person. Rev Yehuda, so he was one of the Chachamim. And him and Bati Bar Tuve was a slave, an Evet Kanani, that belonged to Mar Yehuda. But he was partially free. You know the din by Evet Kanani, if you have a Goyish Evet, and you free him, he automatically becomes Jewish. It becomes like a ger. The difference is a ger, you need that he should agree to it. By an Evet Knaini, when he is your Evet Knaini with all the dinim, and then you free him, he becomes a complete Yid. How do you free him? So you have to give him a shtar shichra. You have to give him, just like by a woman, you give a get, you have to give him a document of freedom. But Bati Bar Tuve was not a 100% free Evet. He call it Mu'ukiv Evet Ksas Mu'ukiv get shichra. He was already freed. The owner freed him, but didn't give him the shtar yet. So at that point, he's not a real Evet, because he's already freed Bemis, but he's not a regular Yid yet because he's missing the Shtar Shichur. That was Bati Bar Tuve. But anyway, even a real Evet, who's 100% Evet, is not allowed to eat treif for food. Because an Evet Knaini is chayiv in all the mitzvahs like a woman. Any mitzvah that a woman is chayiv, an Evet Knaini is chayiv, posha chayiv midaraisa. He has to keep Shabbos, he can't eat treif, etc., etc. Mitzvahs which women are potter from, and Evet Knaini is also potter from them, but otherwise are chayiv. Certainly this one who was a little bit free, so certainly he was chayiv in all the mitzvahs, but he was still missing the shtar shichur. Okay. And when I'm saying it now is because it's negated to the sikha further. So Mar Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuve were sitting in front of the king. His name was Shvur Malka. So they brought an esrik to them. The king took a knife, cut a piece, and ate it. Then he cut another piece and gave it to this Evet, to Bati Bar Tuve. Then he stuck the knife 10 times into the ground. The Gemara says, to kasher nasaken. The Gemara says to kasher a knife, you have to stick it into the ground 10 times. That's what he did. So after he ate himself, the melech, who was a goy, and after he gave Bati Bar Tuve the Evet to eat, then he stuck it into the ground, and then Posek he cut another piece from the esrik. Yehuda gave it to Bar Yehuda. And the reason he stuck it into the ground because he didn't want to give Bar Yehuda a piece of esrik that was cut with a treifa knife. Bati Bar Tuve said to the king, and this guy is not a Yid. What about me? Why did you give me without sticking in? Didn't care to give me if it's not kosher. So he said, one I'm sure and one I'm not sure. So Rasha says, the Rebbe says, Rav Yehuda, he said, I know that he's from, and he's not going to eat treifa food. So I did it dafke, so I should kasher the knife, so I shouldn't give him treifa food. But you, I'm not so sure that you're so frum. So if I'm not so sure you're frum, I wasn't careful to make the knife kosher before I gave it to you. That's one gears in the Gemara. What he told Bati Bar Tuve, why he gave him without sticking it into the ground. Some say that a different conversation they had. The king said to him, when he asked him, why didn't you do it for me too? Well, why didn't you make sure it's kosher for me? So he said, remember what you did last night. What does that mean? So Rashi says, the derech of these parsim, the Persians, was that when the person came as a guest, they would bring women to the people who were their guests. So the night before, when these two came and they stayed over there, so they sent women to them, Sai to Bati Bar Tuve and Sai to Mar Yehuda. Kibul Bati accepted the woman, and Yehuda didn't accept. So that's what the king said to him. I know you're not from, because I know it last night. We sent a Goyish woman, so you took the Goyish woman. So we know you're not from. Learning bepashta, so simple pshat here. What's the difference between two opinions? In the chilik zwischen the zwei mandomas, in dem Entfer von Shvor Malke, in them, the difference between the answer that this king gave to Boti Batuve is this. Was late Nash Entfer hat Shvor Malke gesagt, as nicht sicher, sie Boti is aporish mit der. But he told him why he didn't do it, why he didn't kasher a knife for him. Because I'm not sure that you're so frum and you're staying away from eating something that's forbidden. Like he said, I'm not mursik. Like but according to the second opinion, is by him given avadois as an porish. He not only said, I'm not sure you're so frum. I know you're not frum. Remember what you did last night? You did an aveda. So I know you're not frum. That's why I didn't care. If he said, and this is all learning Posha Pshat, that this was a treifa knife because they used the knife for treifa food, and he kashered it before he gave it to my Yehuda, but he didn't kasher it before he gave it to Boti Batuve. And that was the whole discussion. According to the first opinion, he didn't give it to him because he wasn't sure he's so frum. And the second opinion said, I know you're not frum. I didn't kasher it. If he says, nicht verstanden, according to it's not understood. The Balas Boti at Mekabel when the Noshim Pro Parsius. And neighbor, when the Vanis Revada, he sins Boti accepted his Goyish woman. And was definitely Avera on Avera to Ravosat Shvor Malke Leit Nesh Mondom and Norgizot as Leikim the Begave. So why, according to the first opinion, he only said, I'm not sure you're from when he was sure. Now, the first answer a person will give, this is an argument. According to the first opinion, this didn't happen. That's why he only said, I'm not sure you're from. According to the second opinion, the Messias was it happened. But the Rebbe says, it's a big deiche to say. Adike de Amre is eine Mechulek. The second opinion argues with the first opinion in Ametzias. In fact, Tzis is geschend and fall from of this board to the nit, whether it happened the night before. It's hard to say that the Machlekes ben Temi is what happened. Did this story that he took the Goyish woman happen or not? The Pashtas not arguing in the Metzias, in fact. So for sure that he took that woman. And nevertheless, according to the first opinion, they didn't throw it in his face. All he said, I'm not sure you're from. But the question is why? If he knew that he was Aver and Aveda, he could have told him. The second opinion says, you told her, I know you're not from. So what? So that's why he didn't do it. But according to the second opinion, he didn't say that. Why not? Because the Metzias is that he knew that he did this. So he knew he didn't have Aveda. So he could have told him. Why did they only tell him that I didn't know if you're from? Then the Rebbe continues. In Teisva steht, Aboti hat nicht recht given the Witwa said in Kabel when the Noshim Achrias. Teisva says that the Taka did not do an Aveda. But Boti, by taking this Goyish woman, he did not do an Aveda. By that he's going to an Evet Ksashabuk to get Shikhr, since he was still an Evet a little bit. Because he didn't have his document yet. And an Evet is Mutabish and Nochris. An Evet Kanaini, a Goyish Evet, is allowed to be with a Goyish woman. So he actually didn't do an Aveda. Rasha doesn't mention it. Rasha doesn't say that really he didn't do an Aveda. So Rebbe wants to say Rasha doesn't mention it. Why? Because Rasha Taka holds he was not allowed to. He Taka did an Aveda. And the Rebbe says that this fits, this argument between Rasha and Tosfos fits to something else that they say, similar that they say in a different place. Yeshleimer as Rasha was bavon mit albati in der mit is der mit nit begangen chanisser. Rasha who doesn't say that Boti did not do an Isser, and Tosfos says that he, Rasha doesn't say it's according to Rasha he did do an Isser. And according to Tosfos that he did not do an Isser, he was allowed to be with a Goyish woman. It fits to their own opinions in a different place. Like Din for Nishiyashtim Plain Avdi. By Eilit Akonel Bishtar, in Sichte Gittin, in Gemara Gittin, it says, if someone says, I give up hope from this Eved Aknani of mine. In other words, I'm Mayayish. But what's the din if he's Mayayish? Then he's not his Eved anymore. If you're Mayayish from money that you have, from things that you have, it's not yours anymore. Same thing here, when Mayayish from the Eved, he's not an Eved anymore. But the Gemara says, the only way he's able to marry somebody is now if he gets a shtar shichrer. And Rashi explains, he has no way of getting married, the Bas Yisrael, with a Jewish woman. He can't marry a Jewish woman, he can't marry a Goyish woman, he can't marry a Shivcha Knainis, a Goyish maid, because he's free a little bit. So he can't marry a Jewish woman because he's still an Evet, partially. He can't marry a Goyish woman because he's partially a Jewish man. So he can't. So the only way is if the master will now give him the document, he'll become full-fledged Yid, he can marry a Jewish woman. So Rasha learns that, and this kind of Eved that is free but didn't get the Shtar Shichrur cannot marry a Goyish woman, cannot be with a Goyish woman. But Tosfos Dortenland, Tosfos over there learns not wie Rasha, not like Rasha, nor as like Takonu Baschenim Komer. When the Gemara says somebody who became free because his owner gave up hope on him, but didn't give him the Shtar Shichrur yet, And the Gemara says he has no takana, he can't do anything, that he can't marry. So Tosfos says he can't marry a Jewish woman. Aval b'shivcha shari, a Goyish woman or a shivcha knainis, he could, because he's be'etzim still avid. So just like they argue over there, Aldera says Bati. Same thing concerning this guy Bati. Was his given Bati, as I said in the beginning, was a person in this situation. He was freed, but he was still missing the document. As the Das Rasha, according to Rasha, is also b'shivcha. According to Rashi, he's not allowed to marry a shivcha. So B'mila Rashi doesn't say here that he didn't do an Aveira. So he did, according to Rashi, did an Aveira. And that's what the king said to him. I know you did an Aveira yesterday. According to Tosfos, he was allowed to marry a shivcha. Well, there is a benochish. He marry a shivcha knainis, and the same thing with the goya. That's why Tosfos says be'emes he didn't do an Aveira. But the question the Rebbe asks is not moving the pinish on Tosfos. According to Tosfos, not understood. Since Bati did not do an Aveira, Tosfos holds he was allowed to marry a goya or allowed to be with a goya. If Avosat him Shmuelke geworfen, it came out double word. So what did Shmuelke the king mean to say when he threw it in his face and saying, "Well, you did the Aveira yesterday. You look what you did yesterday." It wasn't an Aveira. So what was wrong with what he did? He says the reason I didn't stick it into the ground for you and I didn't kasher the knife for you because look what you did yesterday. But yesterday, according to us, was not an Aveira. So the Ritva is Masbe. The Ritva explains Shmuelke lo yedei. Shmuelke did not know the din. The king did not know the din that a case in his situation is allowed to be with a goya. Leficha chasha, they say. So therefore, he suspected that Shekishem Shalinizam and Anorchim, just like he was not careful with not being with a goya. Liyochesh legul Anorchim, so he will not care also about eating things from a treifa kela because he didn't know the din. But the Zaina, the truth is not true. Kevet musar b'chol yisurim, because you can't compare the two. Even if he was mutter with a shivcha, but it doesn't mean he's allowed to do other isurim. Okay, Shem Shoser b'chazer b'nevela also b'yuleim. So just like he can't eat chazer, he can't eat nevela treifa food, he can't eat from a kele that was used for treifa food. So he couldn't compare. But he in his mind thought he'll compare the two. But the bottom line, the question that the Rebbe asked, if he, according to Tosfos, that he was mutter to marry a goya, be with a goya, what did he mean? What did Shmuelke mean? Look what you did last night. That you did something wrong, obviously. So I'm sure you're going to do something wrong also by eating. You wouldn't care to eat from a treifa kela. So the answer is, but we asked, he didn't do anything wrong according to Tosfos. The answer is that he didn't know that that's mutter. So this explanation is not so simple. Shvur Malke knew, Rasha Tosfos say that Shvur Malke knew halacha. He says, Muchachek from there, in this Gemara itself, we see he knew that you have to stick it into the ground. He knew that you can't eat treifa food, a kele treifa food, etc., etc. So he was not on Moretz. He knew the dinim. He's not mistabas or at gewusst dem din as a never is mutter benachris. So it doesn't make sense that he didn't know the din that the ever knain is allowed to be with a goya. So b'meile, how could you say that the reason he threw it in his face, saying, "Look what you did last night," even though he was mutter, to say he didn't know that din. All the dinim he knew, punkt that din he didn't know. Es ist echt schwer zu sagen, as nicht gewusst, as Boti is noch an evet ksas. On the other hand, maybe a different thing. He didn't know that Buti was still an Eved. He thought, maybe that's the pshat, that he thought Buti was already free completely. He wasn't missing the shtar, he was free completely. But Mele, according to him, he's also with the Goya. You can't say that. But Yehuda, because it says in a different Gemara that Yehuda announced that in public that his Eved, Bovi Barbuta, is missing a star. Boti Bar Tuva, is missing a star shikra. He announced it. So if he announced it in public, for sure the king knew. So it comes out like this. The king for sure knew that he's a little bit Eved, a little bit still Meshuchra, but he's partially an Eved. For sure he knew the din according to Tosfos that Eved is allowed to be with a Goya. So he knew it not. So what did he mean when he said, I didn't kasher the kele for the knife for you, for the tray for food, because what you did last night. If he was allowed to be with a Goya because he was not Meshuchra yet, and a person like that, according to Tosfos, is allowed to be with a Goya, and for sure he knew the din, so why did he throw it in his face? That's why he didn't kasher the knife for you. In the Protasiper. That's one kasher. The end will be that if we learn that this knife was not treif from treif for food, regular treif for food, from Bishlaka will understand this. Also, you have to understand the details. Bishlema does his body, the message, Mishramalke. Mele, this the fact that Lepel Mamish, Boti Bartuve. took the esrog, Mrs. Mashman for Sipro, does he guess, and it seems like he ate it. Now, why did he do it? If he's from, why did he eat it? It's very simple. It's not because he didn't care about eating food that came from a treife kele. Or maybe he didn't know the din that you can't use a goyish treife kele. Or from sein Shaila, from the fact that he asked the king, why I am not a Yid, he's moving as gewusst uns hat ihm verdrossen. That means he knew he wasn't allowed to. And it bothered him. That's why he said to the king, well, why didn't you do it for me? Well, I'm not a Yid. So why did he? So in that case, he knew the dinim. So why did he eat the food that was used with the streife knife? You must say that he was allowed to. While Leib, wollte nicht gegessen, das wird der Melech eaten, because if he wouldn't eat something that the king offered him to eat, he's like a rebellion against the king. And das sagt Shash from Pikuach Nefesh, then your life is in danger. So if it's a question of Pikuach Nefesh, it pushes away all the Avedas. You should be Aved Aveda and not get killed. So therefore, he had to eat. So there's no kasha why he ate from the food, even though it was used with a treifa knife. And he obviously knew the din that you're not allowed to, because he had to. Als Pikuach Nefesh. If he's so worried about the king and he wouldn't do anything against the king, the question comes up, so how did he complain to the king and say, why did you not do it for me? Why, I'm not Jewish. It's also not nice to speak that way to the king. We're saying the reason he ate from it because he was afraid of the king, and Pikuach Nefesh is true. And speaking to the king that way is not Pikuach Nefesh. So the Rebbe says, no problem. It's self-understood that it's no contradiction. Was noch dem, wie hat gesehen, als Shmuel hat verhit mar Yehuda von Adover Isser, hat gefragt, who gab Rabbi Yisrael. That after he saw how careful the king was to make sure that Bar Yehuda gets a kosher thing, so now he saw, so after that he asked the question. Now he was able to ask, why didn't you? Because before that, when he first cut in that piece for him, he didn't know. He didn't know how he was going to react. So it's a question of Pikuach Nefesh. But now that he saw that the king, what he did before he gave it to Yehuda, so now Bati Batuba saw that this king is okay. This king, I could ask this question because I see he wants the Yid not to be Ever and Aveda. So he could ask him. So it's not a stira. But before he saw what happened, he thought he had to eat it because Pikuach Nefesh. So Mele, the Rebbe says, such a kasha, I can't ask why Bati Batuba ate it. But the question that I'm going to ask is, it's not the king. Number one, the Baldash for Malki need to go to Machshazlam Tadvari. So since Shmur Malki did not want to make somebody transgress an Aveira, do an Aveira, is see their father said, Nigid and Sicher le Kimbel Begavei. As Botti is a Porish from Dvarisuri, das Maspiger soll bewarte Machshazlam gem essen Isa. Shmur Malki was careful, we see. He didn't want to give somebody something treif to eat. So why Taka did he give Botti Bartuba? Why did he give him? Now, why Boti Batur took it, we understand he had to take it. But the question on the king, you were a person who doesn't want to give anybody treif food. Why did you give it to him? Then the Rebbe continues. I feel a lady that's according to the first opinion that he said to him, why did I not stick it in the ground before you? Because I'm not sure you're so frum. And if he's not so sure you're frum, because you have a suffix, maybe he's not frum, you should give him something that you know for sure is treif, that you're not allowed to. So he had to eat it. But the Shmuel the king, should not have given it to him. Because he's not, according to the first Iked that he gave him, he answered him because I don't know that you're so frum. And if he didn't know he's so frum, he still should not have given him. And the second thing, I feel that even according to the second opinion, as Bati had sicher that Bati was certainly Ever and Aveda at night. See Bam is Lachita Rasha, or it was real on Aveda because Rasha holds he was not allowed to be with a Goya. Or the Nor Dash for Malki Lachita Tesis. Or according to Tesis, he was allowed, but for Malki obviously didn't care about it or didn't know about it, whichever way. But it comes out that according to Tesis, the reason he gave it to him because he was sure he was Eber and Avera. According to Rasha, he was Tak Eber and Avera. According to Tesis, at least that's what he thought is Eber and Avera. So according to that, the kasha we asked before is not a kasha. We asked before, according to the first day, that you were not sure he's not frum. Why would, because you're not sure, you'd be give him something in Avera. But according to the second one, it's not a kasha because he knew for sure he's not frum. But still, the Rebbe says, even though he knew that he held that Bati Batuva is not from, but because he did this Aveda being with a Goya, is that a good enough reason to make him do another Aveda? It's kind of Zain. He should have thought in his mind. Could be. As Bati Hotaka Niti can Beistan the Nisoyan Godel Yisr Aveda mit Nochris, that he Taka did Aveda with the Goya. And we know the Aveda of Znus is an Aveda which is a big Nisoyan. It's called the Yitzhahara of an Aveda, is a very strong Yitzhahara. So maybe he couldn't withstand the desire of doing this with a Goya. Und von deswegen ist abgehieten Macholas Asuris. But maybe treifa food he doesn't eat. Actually, we see that. People are like that. Some people want Aveda, they will do it, other Aveda not. Die Frage ist, der Isus Nus mit Anoch, es ist nicht der Chassen, es bezinne ist Isa der Rabbanan. Especially to have Nus with a Goya in a private way that people don't know about it. And not to get married is only Isa der Rabbanan. Und Gula Nochem is Isa Menatera. And not to eat from a kela that's treif, Isa Menatera. So it's very possible that Boti would be over on the Isser with the Goya, but not be over on the Isser of Treifa food, of Kalim from Treifa food, which is the Deraise. So the question is, why did he give him the food that's Treifa food? So why he ate it, we know, because Pikuach Nefesh. According to the first day, the Kasha very strong. He didn't even know that he's not from. He said, maybe you're not from. So why would he give it to him? According to the second one, even though he thought he was for sure not from, in one Aveda, how do you know he's not from in the other Avedas? So what was his answer? Because I know last night he did Aveder's nose with a Goya, which he thought you're not allowed, or maybe Take wasn't allowed, whatever. Because of that, he says, you probably won't care also about Treifa food. Why? What's the raya? Then the Rebbe says, Gimel, the Tmi is noch starker, the Kasha is even greater. Since for Malka, anyway, stuck the knife into the ground for Mar Yehuda. He can't tell me that going free. He could have done it a few moments before. Either already gave bought from the Messi before he gave bought to eat from the Esrik. Or the meat for hitting their bought from the Miser. And by doing that, he would have avoided bought doing this Avera. Why did he push it off and stuck it in only after he gave it to Boti? As there's Oldaf Gasnat Varisser, he should only eat Varisser. No, because he could have done the same thing. But the story, the way it said is, first he cut off his ate it himself. Then he cut off a piece with the same knife and gave it to the Boti. And then he stuck it in the ground and gave it to Rabbi Yehuda. He could have made the order differently. He could have made the order that he would cut, after he ate himself, he would stick the knife into the ground and give it to Rabbi Yehuda and then give it to Boti. Why did it seems like he dafke did it later in order to give Boti the knife which is straight. Why would he do that? So we have many kashas. This last kasha is a kasha like a side kasha, but that Rebbe will be answered based on what we said before. That the knife was not treif. It was treif for a different reason, because it was bishalakum. Schleimer the beer was so the Rebbe could explain all this. The knife was treif, not because of treif of food generally, but that the Leib given him bias for Shmumalke, that this knife in the house of the Goy, the king, the Shmumalke, absorbed from treif of food. That wasn't this knife. The white knife wasn't treif. Why? It makes sense. It's no hechrech in this Gemara, but the kashas will be answered. But besides it, there's a logic behind it. From Zaindik Amela, since we're talking about a king, there's nothing missing in the house of a king. As Hotnit Kenort zu sagen, makes no sense to say, as it's a schneiden Peres, in order to cut fruit, including an esrig, that they used the same knife that they used when they cooked hot meat. For sure, for fruit, there were separate knives. So there was no knife that was able to absorb from treif, because the knife they used for fruit was not the same knife, the pashtas. Nor the sakenig and osem zad bishul nochrim. So we have to say that Rebbe says that the knife was treif, but not because of the regular bishul nochrim. And this fits to the opinion that says that the kalim of bishul akum is also aser. And this is the knife. This was aser. But genutz them sakenig for peres muvesholim achrifi, because they must have used this knife for cooked fruit and sharp fruit. And that belay given from bishul nochrim, and the knife absorbed from the taste of the food that was cooked by a goy. We're only talking about fruit, but the din is anything that cannot be eaten raw, and the only way you could eat it is if it's cooked. There's a din of bishalako. So there are fruits that you can't eat when it's raw, those fruit, when they're cooked through a goy, is also b'shlakum. So the same knife that was used for fruit, probably used for all kinds of fruits, even fruits that were cooked by goyim, and was used. It could be even sharp food, which is in itself, even if it's not hot, but it's sharp, is baleya also. The knife is baleya. So this is a knife that was treif because it absorbed the taste of bishalakum, because it was used for cooking fruit. When you cooked fruit by a goy, and then you use a knife to cut it. So it's the absorbed bishalakum. And the Rebbe says in order 34 star that this eseg itself that they cut was not bishalakum, because then Yehuda couldn't eat it if the knife, only if the fruit, the eseg itself would be bishalakum. So it must have been, the Rebbe doesn't say exactly, but there's tzorechiyun, but it must be that they knew that this eseg itself was cooked by a yid, because eseg cannot be eaten raw. So esrig is one of those things that you have to cook. So there is a din of bishul akum by an esrig. But this esrig obviously was not bishul akum. But the knife was used for other cases when it was used only for fruit, because they didn't mix meat and fruit, the knives, the different knives. So it was used for other fruit, but it was used when a goy cooked the other fruit. So this esrig that we're allowed to eat. The knife itself was also because it absorbed when it was used by other fruit, when it was cooked by a goy. So this knife was bishalakum. Al pizeh, now that we established that this knife was not, like we said, the whole time, it was a treifa knife used for treifa meat, etc. According to this, is moving the roof to Nikadam. Now we'll understand what the second opinion says, that when he said he gave him, he didn't kasher the knife, and he gave it to the Evet, to Boti, and the reason he gave him, because I know what you did last night. Now we'll understand the connection. It's not stam that I know you did one avera, well, you'll probably do another avera, you don't care. That's not what it is. It means dafket specific this avera. Why? The Tama Yisuf from B'shul Nochrim is kenal b'shem chasnes. The reason why you can't eat food that cooked by a goy is because of chasnes, as we said before. And they say that their daughters, this means you might intermarry. Now let's go first to Tosfos. According to Tosfos, Boti was allowed to marry a goy, allowed to be with a goy. So how could there be a iser of kalim that was used for bishul akum if the whole reason why bishul akum itself is osir is because you might marry a goya? But this person is allowed to marry a goya, so how could there be a iser bishul akum by him? And that's what he meant when he said to him that, why did I not do it for you? Because since you're allowed to, we're talking about Tosfos now, holds you're allowed to, in his situation, he was allowed to marry a goya, be with a goya. So why would there be a Isser Bishalakim? Bishalakim is only also because you might come marry and goyim. You're allowed to marry a goyim. So he said, so it's the opposite than we said before. We normally think, he said, and you did another Isser, so I'm going to make you do this Isser. But this is a hard thing to say, because he tried to be careful not to make people ever Isser, this king. So why would he, because he knows he did one Isser, he'll do another Isser. Now the Rebbe says, no, he's Kansalomdas. He was a smart guy, this Shmuel. He said, the whole Isser of the Bishalakum itself, not the Kele, Bishalakum, is because you might intermarry, but you're allowed to marry a goya. So how could it be a din shlaka? The Rebbe says, even though we said in the beginning, at the time for even though the reason is because of chasnas, because of intermarriage, nevertheless, it became be'etzem aniser. When the Rebbe bleibt as Bisura, if dort for the time of Niser bet bottle, therefore the Iser is there, even if the reason doesn't apply. Like I said before, the Kele, the taste of the bishlakim that goes into the kele is not going to bring you to intermarry. Nevertheless, it's also. Why? Because if it became osir, it became osir. So how do we say now that he was telling him, since you were allowed to marry a goya, there is no isser? But the isser became betzim. So Rebbe gives two svores. Why? And they're very logical svores. It does need daimel and need in the dan. It's not the same thing. Varum because. So first he said, lavaza is besides this is not the main reason. Difference. Besides this, was the klal for nasik me'etzem isser. This that we say that something that's also, so even if it's the situation where the time doesn't apply, the reason doesn't apply, it remains also. We're dealing with a specific thing. As the baldas hat sich auf der Sach gelegt, the same soul, since this specific thing became possible, bleibt es if ihr becholinian, it says holinian. The example we're talking about before, you have a piece of wood. That piece of wood is 4 tefachim wide. That piece of wood became also for schach. So even though now you're going to take that same piece of wood and you're going to turn it around. So now it won't be 4 tefachim. So the reason of tikra is not there, but that piece of wood became also. even if you're doing it in a situation that it doesn't have the reason. But in certain cases where we understand that the Isser Lechatchila is not here. It's a situation, not the Pshat. The Isser is here. In your specific case, they're using that object. Here, it's a case where Lechatchila, the Isser is not there. Since the reason for the Isser is not there to begin with, so then the Isser is not there to begin with. Like we see here, there are cases where there is no Isser Bishalakum, the Farvas Bazei, but hate the Chayach of the Gzeir of Mishul Chasnes. The Gzeir of intermarriage does not apply. So it's not a pshat, something that are be'etzem, like we speaking in the example before, that the Bishalakum is the food is Bishalakum. The question is, the taste of the food that went into the kela in that specific situation of that non-kosher food doesn't have the reason. Yeah, but it's still a continuation of the thing which is osir. But something chatchila doesn't have the isur, no reason of bishalakum, then it's mutter. I'll give an example. It's not an exact example, but the example of, it says me that the Gemara says that, mi'ikir adin, water that's left uncovered, unguarded, you're not allowed to drink because we're afraid snakes might have drunk from it. If you left water on the table, you turned around and you come back, you can't drink from it. Maybe a snake came out and put his venom in and it's poison. So the Shulchan Aruch says nowadays it doesn't apply. Why? Because there's no snakes around. The question is, but there's a gzeira. The gzeira is that this is osir. Part of the gzeira is it's osir if there are snakes. So it's not that something became osir, but we want to say that same thing that became osir in a certain situation, the reason doesn't apply. Here it's a case where lechatchila the isur does not apply. So the same thing here also. So the Shvur Malka hadn't set the mind. You are mutter, according to Tesa, you're mutter to marry a goya. You're mutter to be with a goya. If you're mutter to be with a goya, so by you there's whole din that bishlakim doesn't apply. So how could I say that the knife is, which is treifnis, that bishlakim should be osir to you? The whole din of bishlakim doesn't apply. In this case, you can't say etzem isur because the isur doesn't start. In Neisel, besides that, he says, those for the isur bleibt eichman say sibe v'tam v'et bottle. This idea that when there's an Isser and the reason is not there anymore, the Isser remains, meant not as in the talking Chash, Adi Bishul Nochem can interfere to Isser Chasnes. That's in a case like we said, there is Bishul Nochem. It's a case of Bishul Lakim. Elamai, it's a case where we don't think the situation, the way you're in, will lead you to intermarry. Oh, but the Etzem Isser Chasnes is not Faran. You're a person not allowed to marry a Goya. Now the Shaila is, and this is food that had it been, when it's cooked by a Goy, it'll bring you to Chasnes. It will bring, because you're not allowed to marry a Goya. The shaila is, does that food become be'etzem isur? Shenka needn't be done by boti is doch nitod der isur chasnes. Here, there is no isur to get married to a goy to begin with. Hotach kenort nit zu sagen, aber is there an inye for chasnes when they say it's a dover mutter? So it makes no sense to say that when the intermarriage is allowed, soll doch sein osir dos bishul nocher was kann dafür ins chasnes. So this that is only osir because it might bring it to chasnes should be osir. So it's not the same thing that we said before. Before we gave Isser, because there was nothing that became Osir. Here he says, besides the point, if there is no Isser of Chasnes to begin with, so we can't say something that's a derivative of something that's Osir, B'Shum Chasnes, should still be Osir. Why? Because of Chasnes, when you yourself are allowed to marry a Goy. So B'Mela, we understand what he meant when he said that I didn't do it for you because I know what you did last night. But that is like a mass behind the end for Shmuelke. So this so we could explain the answer of Shmuelke. If came out of his burta, that should ask Rashi to explain to Rashi. According to Tosfos, it makes a lot of sense because you're allowed to marry. How could I care that you shouldn't eat bishalakum? In this case, it's a kela that was believed from bishalakum when you're allowed to marry a goya. What about the Rashi? According to Rashi, it was taka osir. So you can't say this, that he gave it and he said, for you it's mutter because there's no isur of marrying a goya. But according to Rashi, we could also understand that. As Boti given osir benach. According to Rashi, he was also to marry a goya. Chotcher when I have a ksas, even though he's still a shtickle avid, but nevertheless, because he was a shtickle, meshucher, a shtickle free, he's not allowed to marry a goya. But you could understand what he meant. Yibald as that isur mishul nochem is not to verhiten from Nisayim. According to Rashi, you taka did an avera. But the question was, if he did an avera, why would he think he'd do another avera, a different avera? So he's saying, no, it's not a different Aveda. It's the same Aveda. According to Rashi, it's like an Aveda. But since the whole reason of the Aveda is because you might marry a Goya, hat gehalten, so Shvur Malke held, as I said, talking time for Hechet, so you see in body from the Msiok, so that there's no reason for me to make sure that he doesn't do the Aveda, which is a siog, which is a fence, not to do the Isser that will lead you to intermarry, based as is not upgate in the Misaratzim the same, since he's not careful with the Isser. According to Taisvus, that's much stronger, that he had no Isser to eat Bishalakum, because you're allowed to marry a Goya, so how could it be also Bishalakum? According to Rashi, it's not like it, but still, he thought to himself, since he's Aver and Aveda of being with a Goya, so obviously he's not careful with Aveda Bishalakum. Another Aveda would be careful, but he says, this is the same Aveda. What you did last night and what I'm going to be machshel you now is the same Aveda. There is being with a Goya, and here it's an Aveda of eating something that might bring it to a Goya. Obviously, you're not careful in the Goya itself, so he certainly won't be careful with this. So that's why he said to him, why did I not kasher the knife for you? Because I'm sure that you wouldn't be careful. Why? Because I know what you did last night. So according to Rash, Taisvus is because he felt that you're allowed to eat it, and according to this, you're not allowed, but you're not careful with the same Aveda because of all the same Aveda. Now we'll understand the first guy. First kasher was, since the Mitzias was that he did do the Aveda last night. So why, according to the first opinion, did he only say to him, well, I'm not sure you're frum? If he knew for sure he's not frum, like we asked in the beginning, if he knew what happened last night, he's not careful of mitzvahs, so why did he say only to him, Rabbi Yehuda, I'm sure he's frum, but you, I'm not so sure. So he says like this. Besides the reason we gave, why can't you eat food cooked by a goy? It's because of intermarriage. If there's another reason. It's another reason. The reason is, that the reason is because if you're going to eat food cooked by a goy, you will become acquainted with him and you'll come visit him in his house and you'll eat it over time. You eat tray for food, not because of chasnas, not because you marry his daughter, because you'll come to eat tray for food. Oh. So the Isser of Bishalakum is because it might lead you to eat treif. So now we could say, I did zwei man domers in Gemara, and verbunden mit zwei timing. That the two opinions in Gemara, whether he only told him, I'm not sure you're so frum, or the second way he told him, for sure I know what you did last night. At these two opinions, so the mechulik velchef is the tamikil. The machlekes is which are the two reasons why you can't eat bishlakim is the main one. Late nikedam is the tamikil shemchasle. According to the second lotion, the ikir is because of marriage, intermarriage. And the firefight and it can my out the boat if I was and then but from bishul. So then we understand why when he said why I didn't make sure that you don't eat from the kela of bishalakum because of what you did last night. We understand the connection. The dasa taste as well. It is mutter with same according to taste because you're allowed to marry a goy. So how could you be also bishalakum, which might bring you to Isser goy? Well, the das Rashi. Well, I say you need to upgate him the same. According to Rashi, you're not allowed. But I see you're not careful with marrying, being with a goy. B'meila, I was sure you're not careful in bishalakum. Of a late national lotion. So that was the second lotion. That's why he threw in his face and he said, "Well, what you did last night means that you're going to eat bishalakum." But like national law is the time the first opinion holds that the main thing of bishlakam is not because you might intermarry. The main thing is you might come to eat treif. According to this chash, this won't be an answer. See, the Rebbe is learning the pshat that it's not the pshat he threw in his face. You did another aveira. I knew you're not careful. That's not true because you did one aveira means another aveira. So the Rebbe learned the pshat is because he told him. You didn't have what I did to you is connected to that same Avera. Avera, what you did is the same thing as Bishlakim, because Bishlakim is because of the union of marrying a non-Jewish woman. But if you hold that's not the main thing for the Isra of Bishlakim, the main reason for Bishlakim is because you might come to eat the treifa thing. So that's what the first opinion holds. So you couldn't tell him, well, remember what you did last night. What does being last night doing the Avera with the Goya have to do with eating Bishlakim? According to the time, because the bishalak is also because you might marry a goya. So in this case, you're marrying a goya, you got a goya anyway. But according to the first lotion, if he holds that the ikid is because he might eat something treif. So what kind of answer would it have been? I know what you did last night. How would that answer? That's why I didn't care to give you bishalakum. What's the connection? You did on one avera, you'll do another avera. I should make you do another avera. So therefore, he couldn't tell him that. So what did he tell him? Something else. I didn't know you. I didn't think you're so frum. I'm not sure you're so frum. Es bleibt aber nicht verstanden, es ist not understood. Genau. The next man, according to the first one, ja, sehe ich vom Alkestein oder Kinder Bekaveh, Berechtigung zu machen, sein Boti mit der Dover Isser. So, but other kasha remains. Taka, you couldn't answer him because you had a goya last night. That has nothing to do with this Bishlakum. But the other question that we asked before, all he said was, I'm not sure you're so firm. Is that a reason to give him something that's treif? Because I'm not so sure. So that's one shaila we have on the first lashon. Eich is noch nicht mevoyer heitev lashon like nikadamra lashon shitas Rashi. And there is another kasha according to the second lashon, according to Rashi. Emestak as boti nigiv and nisere b'niseim. According to someone, boti was also to marry to have this guy here. But he wasn't careful. That's what he told him. You're also not careful. When the father is not talking, therefore, there's no reason to not let you eat bishalakum, which is only as a syog, a fence not to marry a goya when you yourself don't care about the goya. So we understand it's all the chobah. Fort given best when there is magdim on it, sakim bekarka either a schneider message for botit. But what did he care? Taka, he says, I assume that you're not careful. But from his part, assume you're not careful. In this, according to Rashi, you're not careful in the sort of a goya, and therefore I'm sure you're not going to be careful. According to the second law, you're not going to be careful in bishlakum, because bishlakum is because you shouldn't marry a goya. But that's according to the ikadamri. But still, what did he care? He felt that you're probably not going to be careful in bishlakum. But what did he care to do it before and give it to him? In other words, according to Rashi, the second learns that he saw that you're not careful. But because he thought he's not careful, that's why he should also participate in giving him something, right? It's not a special tirche. He could have done it first and then give it to him, and he would have saved him from doing an aveda. So we have two shilas now. Number one, according to the first lashon, when he said, I'm not sure you're from. Why is that a reason to give him something to do an aveda? Because he's not sure that he's from. And according to the second lashon, according to Rashi Shita, he said because you're not careful with getting married, having a goya. So therefore, he says, if you're not careful, I'm going to give you bishlakim. Why? I could avoid another aveda. Why shouldn't you do it? Is there beer in them? So the explanation is like this. The din is as a punishment, like a person who became a leader on a community is not allowed to do any melacha in front of three people. Certainly a king. Even though he was a goy, the halacha as milsa b'taime was his bishlemusa nochri. But if it's a goy doesn't have this dinim. This is a din that you can't do a melacha in front of people. But any din that makes sense logically would apply to a goy also. Father Nochri by the gossip asked certain the guy himself would behave that way. You have to have covered even from the goyish kings. And the reason why, the reason covered the melech is as achvas is negay is yeshuv shalelom. To have covered for the king is negay to the world, that the world should be inhabited properly. That's why you have to have a king, like the Mishnah says. If you wouldn't have the fear of a king or the government, people would kill themselves. Even though it's not one of the Shavim mitzvahs, but anything has to do with Yishuv Elam, with the settling of the world should be in the proper civilized way. It's included in the Shavim mitzvah. So even a Yid has to have covered for a king. So the king had to behave in a way that he should have covered. Because of covered of the king, he wasn't allowed to. The king should do a malacha. He should do the job of sticking to the ground. And since he thought that Boti is going to eat the esrik without even sticking to the ground, and had he done it, he would not have been able to iser. As we said before, as but the king knew that he was going to eat it anyway, and he was allowed to eat it because of Pikuach Nefesh. He was not allowed to stick it into the karka and give it to him because he would be doing a malacha in front of him. Like even though Shvur Malka did not want to make somebody Eivera Iser, but in this case it wouldn't have been an Iser because he was allowed to eat it because of Pikuach Nefesh. So that's why he did not stick it into the ground before he gave him. Aber sehr schwer, das Bord für Schwarmalke, was Nesig und am Sacken, der Karke, das Gefar Mar Yehuda, or Mar Kimli Bagavei. This explains also why he stuck in before he gave it to Rabbi Yehuda, and he said, I'm sure about him that he is from. Now, what did he mean, I'm sure about him? Really, he shouldn't stick it even for Rabbi Yehuda, because he's a king. But what he meant to say, the mitot is that, but the need gemeint as the gay Mar Yehuda is a sicher, wird nicht essen, dover osser. When the gay botin is my masofik. Didn't mean, well, him I know is from, and you, I'm not so sure you're from. That's what he meant. The Kimel Bakaveh as Mar Yehuda wird b'shumeif nicht essen the message. And Mar Yehuda, I know he's not going to eat the esrik, afal pia megas esem in that din, even if you're allowed to afil when das is verbunden with koch nefoshes. He said like this, I know he's going to, that you're allowed to eat it. I shouldn't really stick it in the ground at all. And I give it to you. And you're allowed to eat it. Why are you allowed to eat it? Because koch nefesh, I'm the king and you have to eat what I'm giving you. But he said to him, Rabbi Yehuda, I know, will go on Mesiris Nefesh, even in a case when you don't have to. That's what he meant. I'm not this time I know he's from and you're not from. I know he's very from. Rashi in this 46, the Rebbe is dying. Rashi, Porush Kol Kach, he's very from. The Fratim Tim Tzleim at the Retzach wegen Rabbi Yehuda, but the Gemara sagt wegen ihm, as I give him Kamoyu, have a Kamosra Nafshai, Akdush Hashem. The Gemara says, in Brochas that the earlier generations, people would go Mesiris Nefesh. I feel them is not mechuyev in them, even if you're not mechuyev. The Mashah explains, or not the Mashah, or Eitz Yosef, no, not the Mashah. The Eitz Yosef explains, and that's what he meant. So he said like this: really, I shouldn't stick it in because I'm not allowed to. It's like I'm a king doing the job, and you'll eat it. You'll eat non-kosher food. Doesn't matter. You're allowed to because it's pikuach nefesh. But by Yehuda, I know he will go on Mesiras Nefesh and not eat it, even if it's pikuach nefesh. The Meilish for Malka give a muchrach to neya sein so the bim mesaken bekarka. That's why for Malka had to do it. Not to he gave it to Boti. He gave it to him without sticking because he was not allowed to stick it in, and there wouldn't be a problem. He would eat it anyway, and he was supposed to eat it. But it came to Rabbi Yehuda, he said, here I have to stick it in, because if not, he's not going to eat it, and he'll be chayiv misa, because he'll be a meir of malchus. Pashenke far bote before cause, but was leim kumel bagavei. By bote, is mesupik nitzi is bechlal porish misurim chas v'shalom. He did me. I'm not sure if you are careful from avedas. Replace the bote with this. See bote with this meise nefesh of them. I don't know if bote would go on meseres nefesh. But for Malka als melech nit getort mavata sein of sein kovet. So Malka als king was not allowed to give up on his kovet. Ton farim the malacha for nitz sasaken bakart and do this malacha and put it in. So by bote he was not allowed to stick it in, and he would not have been machshel in avera. But by Yehuda, he says, I know he is going to go on Mesiras Nefesh. So the question was that how could he, because he wasn't sure he's so frum, he's going to give him something as strafe. But the Rebbe answered the question. Not he didn't mean I didn't know he's frum. He's frum, but he won't do any avera if I give it to him without sticking in. So that's why, and he's a melech, he's not allowed to stick it in. But the Rebbe in the order 50 answers also, this answers something else. L'chura, he had an eitzeh. He could have stuck it in first and give it to Rav Yehuda first. And that he's allowed to. So even though he's doing malacha, but the malacha that he's doing, he's allowed to do, because if not, and he'll give it to him without sticking in, Rav Yehuda might not eat it. Go on Mesiras Nefesh. So he could have stuck it in first, give it to Rav Yehuda, and that makes sense. Rav Yehuda was more choshev than Poti. So why did he not give it to stick it in, give it to Rav Yehuda, and then give it to them to Poti anyway? So the Rebbe says, and the Chudah should be mekavet him. Interesting that Shmuel Malka wanted to teach a din. He bedafke did it to show him that he's not allowed to stick it in for Boti. So bedafke, he didn't stick it in, gave it to Boti. So now you see that he's not allowed to give up on his cover. It came to the view that he had no choice because of that. From them, from this story, we have a lesson in Avitas Hashem. Dover erzählt, as Shmuel Malka seine gesessen, zwei Menschen, seinen Gewinn Mechuyev in Koved HaMelech. In front of Shmuel Malka sitting two people. Both had a chiyuv, an obligation of Koved of the king. Einer von sie ist gewinn, Yishrek von dem nititischen Melech. One of them was afraid of the Goyische king. Und der Pfarrer hatte gegessen von der Peder, was Shmuel Malka hat geschnitten mit nicht kosher und sagt, and that's why he ate from the fruit that Shmuel Malka cut with a non-kosher knife. He finished a heter of them, said them time for pikuach nefesh. He found a heter because he was allowed to, because pikuach nefesh. Und der the Bamelech nit katken kerken covet. And this person who gave cover to the king didn't get cover from the king. That zweite was by Shlomalka is given Kimle Begaveh as a Nit Ever on the Iser. The second one, that Shlomalka was sure that he will not be able in Iser Afilu with Asrita and cover the Mela Biz Mesiras Nefesh, even though it means against the covenant of the king. If the king would not kasher it, he would not eat it, and he would have gone on Mesiras Nefesh. Dafke der Yid had not blazing it verloren am Chaim Bamela. This Yid not only did not lose the grace in the eyes of the king, nor other, on the contrary, Shlomalka allein that Mavatik and Avzain covered Malchus. Shlomalka, the king himself, gave up on the covenant of the king, and he was Matriach himself to serve Mar Yehuda. He could have called him one of the servants there, but him and tell him that he should stick it into the ground. Or that I feel Mar Yehuda and he could have told Mar Yehuda to do it. The guy sees a Yid, was a Yid Shemayim, that stays away from Isurim, from Avedas, even up to Mesiras Nefesh. The Goy feels it as an honor for him to serve that Yid. And that's why he himself did it. Not only give cover to the Yid, he helped him to be Mekayim HaHidur, because really, he could have, had he not done it, he was supposed to, Alpidini was able to eat it. He was allowed to eat it. So for a Hidur mitzvah, he went away, he went over his cover that he was supposed to have because he saw how strong the Yid is in his Yiddishkeit. This is the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah. So they've used it. That means this behavior, which is written at the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah, will bring to the end of Avodah Zarah. We destroy Avodah Zarah in the world. The Melucha becomes the Eibush, is the real king. In the whole world, the Eibush is the king on the world.